Okay, Chair, we're good to go.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this committee, the Economy and Resources Scrutiny Committee, on Thursday, the 6th of January. We will just to go through a bit of housekeeping at the start. You'll all have seen the message that this is an informal meeting, and any notes that we take from this meeting will be ratified at a subsequent meeting. I'll let Councillor McEwen in. And another thing just from me, in terms of questions, I was having a think about this. When I allow you to ask a question, everyone's very polite in their follow-up. They say, Chair, if I may, etc. Once I've given you the opportunity to ask your question, I don't mind that you then continue until you've finished your questions, as long as you're not taking an hour, 5-minute limit kind of thing. Just so that everything starts to flow a bit better. I don't mind that you just carry on until you've finished, and then I'll move on. And if anyone wants to put their hand up during that question, then we'll see if there's anyone who wants to contribute to that line of questioning, but it just avoids us having to go backward and forward to me during one council. Okay. So we'll
Understood.
Start. Say again.
Understood.
Good. That was basically for you, Councillor McEwen. You're very polite in your.
If I may, Chair, have you been on a course or something?
No, I've just been watching a lot of the American politics recently. So introductions we'll start with. I'll just get the list up. See who have we already. We have an apology from Councillor Wright. So I'll just run through the names if you want to indicate, and Shirley will give you a tick on the register. Councillor Barch. You may not be in yet. Councillor Boddy.
Here.
Councillor Cruddas.
Here.
Councillor Harker.
Here.
Councillor Hughes.
No.
Councillor Jones.
Morning. Here, Mike.
Morning. Councillor McEwen.
Here.
I've got on the list. Councillor Paley has also sent in her apologies. In terms of officers, Elizabeth.
Yeah, thanks.
Mark. Anthony.
Here.
Sorry, Chair, I'm here. A bit of a mix-up with my fingers.
Hi, Mike. Yep, I heard you, Anthony, as well. And Brett.
Here.
And cabinet members, Councillor Durham. I know he might not be in yet. He's having trouble. He's getting an update, I think. And Councillor Marshall.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, good stuff. Next, do we have any declarations of interest? Nope. Okay. I realise there are some other officers in the meeting that I haven't read out. They're not on my list, so I don't know if when we come to you talking, you can just introduce yourself if you like, other than me trying to go and work out who you are. So next, to approve the minutes of the meeting of this scrutiny committee held on the 4th of November, long time ago now. Do we have any questions, any points to make, any matters arising? I can't see any hands up. So I think right now all I can do is just note those. I can't formally accept those. I think they'll have to be formally voted in another meeting. Is that correct, Shirley?
Yeah, it is, Chair. Thanks.
Yes, so we'll move on to the first major part of the agenda, and that is the Customer Services and Digital Strategy report from Anthony Sanders. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yep, thank you, Chair. I'm pleased to present the Customer Service and Digital Strategy for your consideration prior to approval by Cabinet. And just before I go into the report, I just wanted to provide some background, some context as to why we have this strategy before this committee. You're probably aware that for a number of years we've been consciously moving more and more of our services online that were traditionally provided face-to-face or over the telephone. And primarily that is because that's what our customers wanted, and as obviously technology has moved forward, we're able to do that. But we were aware that we didn't really have a strategy that kind of formally monitored that process, and in particularly making sure that we had the right safety nets in place for those customers who are unable, for whatever reason, to access our online services, and to ensure that they could still access the traditional face-to-face and telephone services. So we've been developing this strategy. Of course, it got disrupted by COVID, as everything. And the strategy itself contains 7 main aims. And those are, firstly, we want to ensure that we're providing excellent customer services through all the channels that we have, whether it's face-to-face, telephone, or through digital. And we want to develop some performance standards. We don't have any performance standards. We used to when I think customer services first developed around 15 years ago, but we don't have any performance standards that the whole council can sort of sign up to. So we'll want to ensure that we develop those in the next year, and obviously ensure that you as members of this committee have input into that, can oversee those standards. We of course want to provide good quality and easy to use digital services that are safe and reliable for our customers to use, and that our customers have confidence in using them. We want to make it clear how customers can contact us. So whilst digital will always be the first choice, we need to ensure that we always provide information to our customers about how they can speak to a member of staff if they need to do so. We want to make it clear what we can help customers with and what we can't. And I guess the big change here is that for a lot of our services that are available online, there is an expectation that for those people who can use them will do so. And really, customer services is there for those services that aren't available online, or for those customers who are unable, again, for whatever reason, who can't use those digital services. We want to obviously deliver value for money, but be clear that this is not just a cost-cutting exercise. And if we do identify any efficiencies through operating more digital services, that will reinvest that money into providing support for our customers who are unable to use those services. Invest in our people to ensure our staff have the right skills and IT equipment to support our customers, and finally to listen to our customers and use this to improve our services through surveys, etc., and also through complaints about the service. So those are the 7 aims of the strategy, and like with a lot of strategy of this nature, they can become out of date very quickly. So one of the things we want to do is to use this committee to regularly sort of report and monitor progress against the strategy. There's a couple of sections towards the end, you'll notice, which is about what we are going to do, and that's about further improvements to the website or online forms and to customer services that we've committed to. And the last section is about how we'll know if we've achieved our aims, and that's about the outcomes that we're expecting from delivering more and more of our services online. And those will be things like less footfall and less telephone calls to our services. And probably it'd be useful just to give an example of that. A number of years ago, when we introduced our online benefit forms to our benefit service, we used to get around about 1,000 people who used to come and visit our contact centre every month. And that's because we used to have paper-based forms, and we used to ask people to come in and bring their documentation in. Well, obviously, we introduced an online form, but it wasn't just a case of putting an online form on our website. We had to do a lot of process re-engineering that sat behind that. So we had to look at the processes we used to process those benefit claims, including the documentation we needed to support those claims, because we didn't want to just have an online form and then make people come into the contact centre, because that really wouldn't have delivered any improvements at all. So we introduced things like the Scan Station and the Scan Station app, which allowed people to take pictures of documentation and send it to us electronically. But also we looked at whether we actually needed some of that evidence and whether we could get it from other sources. So by doing that, we actually, the net result was that we reduced our footfall from 1,000 a month, and it didn't take that long to get down to around 200. So we took about 80% of our face-to-face contact for that service out straight away. And of course, actually, that's really helped us with COVID, because if we still had the old process in place, we'd have found it really difficult to deliver that service. Of course, there is difficulties in terms of, because the footfall, of course, over the last 18 months has been zero, to be honest. And that's been difficult in terms of how we can support those customers who can't access those online services. So we've had to do a lot more over the phone than we normally probably would have done. But that has set us up well in terms of going forward, because it made us sort of able to deliver those services easier during COVID than it would have been had we not done that. And of course, that's not just benefits. We've done that with council tax, with housing, with bulky waste. We've put that online, and that's reduced the telephone calls significantly to that service. So there's evidence that shows that this has had a huge impact on the way we deliver services. And again, what we want to do is come back probably later this year, if you agree, Chair, to give an update as to how we've progressed against the strategy, what new developments have come in, and what the impact has been against our on our customers and on how we've delivered those services. But of course, what we want to do is do a bit more work in terms of digital exclusion and how we can help those customers who are unable for whatever reason to access those digital services. And that's, I think, all I want to say about the report. There is we did some customer consultation on the strategy. We did get limited responses. Again, it was difficult due to COVID to actually get some sort of non-digital responses. And overall, there was sort of higher levels of satisfaction. There were sort of some higher levels of people reported it difficult to use the website, and particularly around some of those sort of longer, more complicated forms like benefits. But again, that just underlines the need to have those staff in place who are able to support those customers with those forms if they need to do so. So I'm open to questions, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Anthony, and thank you to your team for the work you've been doing on this report. I will open to any questions. I've got Councillor Bodier, so your physical hand go up first, I think.
Yes, I was just interested, Anthony, just talking about digital exclusion. Are you doing any work with the library staff, especially up at Cockerton? Because I know the IT facilities have been put back in there since the refit, and it is a very handy little spot, Cockerton. It saves you coming into town for a whole variety of reasons. And I was just wondering if they could be included in the training to help people with their digital online forms through the PCs that are in the library.
Yes, absolutely. The libraries are obviously one of the key points where people come to access the services. So definitely we'll include those in any training and any new services that get rolled out. But also we want to look at probably other community locations like community centres as to whether we can sort of base some staff and some equipment there. But obviously we've got the additional PCs in the contact centre that we put in place just before COVID. Unfortunately, they didn't get used because we closed the centre. But as we're opening up, we expect those to be used more.
Well, in relation to my own ward, can I just flag up the Havelock Centre then, please? That's one of those locations.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Cruddas.
Yes, thank you. Anthony, I was just wondering if there's an element of help that can be provided by our learning and skills people to get people upskilled on digital use. I know that their services tends to be funded by the number of people they manage to process, so it might be a double whammy for us if we could actually use them to do some training for digitally excluded people.
Yeah, absolutely, and we'll link up with that service to see what sort of training we can provide. As I said, it's been very difficult over COVID to sort of think about how we can plan for this sort of thing. But as we open up more, certainly there's a role for them to play. So I'll ensure we link up with that service as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Harker.
Thanks, Chair. A couple of points, really. First, a question: can you give some detail about how that consultation took place? Was it online? Was it, if it was paper-based in any sense, how was that done? And secondly, just to talk about digital exclusion, I guess there's two reasons why people choose not to use digital. It's either by choice because they like talking to people, or because they are unable, either because they don't have the facilities or they don't feel confident to do so. And I'm slightly concerned in the strategy that the underlying tenet is that residents will use online facilities, and that's just a given. And I sort of say that because one of the points it makes in there is that people haven't got access to digital kit that they need to deal with the council. One of the solutions is we'll provide computers at the town hall. And to me, that seems to be saying that if someone can't or chooses not to, what it's sort of saying is the only solution we'll provide is they have to then come to the town hall to use computers that they may, for whatever reason, choosing not to do so. I'm thinking primarily of older people who typically enjoy the contact, for whatever reason, and choose not to use IT, or they just find it difficult to do. And I'm sort of concerned that whilst, and it sounds like I'm being critical of technology, and I spent a career working in it, so I fully understand its benefits and how it can help people. But there are many reasons why people choose not to do so, and I think the strategy doesn't really take into account those people, for whatever reason, are not engaging in using IT. And the final point I'd make is I'm not sure yet that we've actually used our digital services to the benefit that we can. And I'll give a simple example of something that works really well, but there's a but. The reporting of stuff to street scene is actually now quite clever in that you can take photographs, send it in, and in doing so, the location of it is very accurately described because it picks up where you did the stuff, and that's very clever and very good. What I was very disappointed about was, yes, the sofa disappeared, but I didn't get anything back digitally to say that it had been done. Now, to me, the whole point of using that kind of system is that we can develop it far beyond what we do currently when it's verbally reported or emailed in. And one of the criticisms I often get from residents is that you report stuff, but you never get anything back. Yes, the work's done, but I had to go out and see whether the sofa had been taken away a few days later. And yes, it had done. Street Scene had done the job. But I'm pretty certain if we got the capability for me to report that equally, once Street Scene's ticked it off, because that's going to be followed by a process internally, that it'd be very easy for a message to go back to anyone who'd reported it to say, yes, we've done it. Because in that particular instance, I'd seen it, a couple of residents had told me about it, and I was then getting emails saying, has it been done, has it been done? And I had no idea. And there must be simple means to do that kind of thing, using the IT to feed back to residents when queries like that have been actioned. Thank you, Chair.
If I could come back on those, Chair. Firstly, in terms of the consultation, it was very difficult because ideally we would have wanted to do more face-to-face engagement, which has been difficult because of COVID. So yes, there was an online survey, but of course one of the questions asking is about whether you're able to use online, and of course by default anyone who's went on the survey on the website will would have been one of those people. So we did some face-to-face engagement with the people who've come into the contact centre. It was limited because obviously it's an appointment-based service at the moment, but we were able to capture some of those views. And also we talked to some of the external organisations such as the CAB and Age UK, who also support some of their customers with accessing online forms in general and the website, and just asked about what support they had in place as well. So it's not just about the council provided support, it's about some of those other sort of voluntary sector organisations that also provide support. So yes, it was limited, and probably we wanted to do more. When we started the consultation, actually was just before COVID, we did start to get some paper-based surveys being sent back, but of course it got pulled when obviously we had to shut down. So yeah, it's a bit disappointing we couldn't do more, but I think we recognise this is not just a one-off process. We will carry on doing consultation on our services going forward. That's one of the commitments of the strategy. Keep capturing those views and reviewing those the support that's in place for those customers who cannot access digital. In terms of your other comment about the people who are unable to use digital, we know that obviously a vast majority of people can use it and want to use it. I mean, when, going back to my question about the benefit forms online, when we first introduced them, we gave customers a choice to fill out the paper-based form or fill out the online form. We found very rapidly that about 90% of people filling out the online form, and these were, people who generally were on a low income and fairly vulnerable customers. And I think obviously a lot of people who are on benefits are used to having to do things online because that's the way the DWP have set up their systems with universal credit. But we provided support in place for those people who couldn't use the online form, and we continue to do so, whether it's just people phoning up asking a couple of questions or whether someone actually needs a member of staff to fill out a form for them if they're unable to access it. And I can reassure you that we don't refuse people who want support. We don't really go into the reasons why they can't do it. We'll of course point them towards the form and give them the option. And most people are grateful for that. They want to do it themselves. They're quite capable of doing things themselves. But again, our staff are there to provide advice and support for those customers. So even a service like bulky waste, for example, that's gone online. We used to get 700-800 calls a month when it wasn't an online service. We get about 100, so there's been a big reduction, but those 100 would still want help and support, and we're happy to provide that. So that support will always be in there for our customers. And in terms of what you talked about reporting back when you report something, I understand that's a further development of the app. That report it function will have that feedback facility. I don't think it's quite in place yet. I'm not aware of the technical intricacies of that particular bit of software, but I understand that's a further development to the app.
Thank you. Sorry, there was one other thing I was going to ask about. Thanks for those responses. That's helpful. There's reference in the report to producing or providing rather a chat facility. I guess thinking about some of the facilities I've used where there's chat, some of them are completely useless and they're just seen as a hurdle that you have to go through before you actually speak to someone, and they're in the guise of automated chatbots that struggle beyond very simple questions. Is what we're thinking of actually being able to have a dialogue with a human as opposed to some computer generated responses that frankly yet in my experience don't really provide any help whatsoever other than the most trivial of responses. And do we have any knowledge, I guess, from other local authorities that have actually done this successfully? Because if it's done well, they can be very good, but equally if they're not done very well, they are frustrating and largely a waste of time for the person trying to use them. And as I said, seen as a hurdle to progressing forward. Thanks.
I might actually ask my colleague Claire Gardner-Queen, who's leading on that particular side of that project, to possibly respond to that. Claire, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no problem. Good morning, everybody. Yes, we are obviously looking at the chat section, but it'll be a mix of both. So some of it will be automated. So for very basic questions such as what's my bin day, collection day, it'll automatically generate either a link to the page saying this is where you find it, or actually put your postcode in and this is what your date is. But if it starts to then become a little bit more intricate or a little bit more difficult to answer, then it will then go to a person. So you will have one of our customer services advisors who normally speaks with people on the phone. They'll also be able to use the chat, and they will be answering the questions that way. So for myself, I agree. There are some ways it works absolutely brilliantly, and then there are other services that don't. So what we will be using is the system which we use for our telephony system, which is quite a prominent company, and they work with the NHS and things, so they have a lot of experience of using chatbots and Autobots and whatever else they want to call them and things. But yes, so there will be a mix of person and automation on those. And we also found from our consultation that a lot of people actually asked if there could be a help section. So could there be a chat function on there? So we know there is a desire and a need for it, but we'll roll out very slowly. We'll take it very simply, and we won't jump in with 2 feet, I think, is probably the best way for us to take it.
Thanks to you both, and thanks, Joe.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McEwen.
Thank you, Chair. It's on the theme of digital exclusion, just a different aspect. Clearly, we're not the only organisation that is dealing with people who are digitally excluded. So consequently, and it's more a point rather than a question, it would be sensible to liaise with other elements of the public sector or indeed civic society on this, because we're all fishing from the same pool. And I'm looking at Claire, and I'm sure Claire will have housing clients who use GPs and are probably scratching their heads on a housing form plus an e-consultation form. So actually, it would be more optimal to make sure that we're keeping tabs with other public sector colleagues, because we all have a common interest, if you like, and it's probably the same pool of people. And the second point is, I'm just reflecting as part of this discussion, whenever we have this kind of discussion, we always come up with digital exclusion. What I'm reflecting on now is, do we know whether we're having a positive impact? Are we shifting the needle? And if the needle is shifting, is that down to us, or is it down to more sort of wider family and societal issues? Probably really hard to answer. And I'm reflecting on my own personal position. I bought my stepmom an iPad for Christmas, and so she's gone from wouldn't do anything electronically really now to well, she hasn't done any forms yet, but she's on that iPad 8 hours a day now. So I don't know, it's more a point I'm making rather than a question. Thank you, Chair.
Did you have anything to say on that, Anthony?
Again, Claire, probably the best person to answer that question.
I think I would probably agree with your point around. I think COVID has made some people who were a little reticent about using digital technology and things, and they've sort of moved with the times and recognised that it was easier for them to do so. And I think when we look at, whilst we didn't get a great response to our consultation, some of the feedback from the people who did respond was really positive, and said, why would we not do things more digitally, and they want us to expand it. So I think it is difficult for us to be able to say whether it's us or whether it's the environment, and whether it's family and things like that have improved things. But I think it's COVID has probably made people be a little bit more accepting of digital ways of working. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor McEwen. Thank you for the answers. I have a couple of questions from me. Back to the consultation question. Can you explain how you reached out to consultees, whatever you want to call it? And obviously, I'm assuming it was a question at the end of a form that they'd already filled in. Do you want to fill in a survey, etc.? And previous consultations, if we've done anything like this before, what's the difference because of COVID in terms of how successful they've been? Because I think is it 64 responses. It's very little. So if you're trying to do a large piece of work from such a small data set, it's quite difficult. And then also, do we have any information on the demographic of those consultees in terms of age range and sex, etc.? And then finally, will you be following up with those specific consultees to see what they think of the changes that have been made?
Yeah, I mean, the consultation was done on the strategy and it was on the website for a limited period, hence why we got probably a limited response. But as I said previously, I think the intention is to continue consulting our customers about the service. Ideally, you want to capture those people who are coming in, but by default, they'll possibly the people who may not be able to use the online services, who need to speak to a member of staff, and we need to understand a bit more about why they're coming in, what the barriers are for those people, and then what we can do, obviously, to put in place to support those people. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Claire, at all.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, we did ask people when they came into the centre, but obviously it is restricted at the moment. We contacted the third-party agencies and things and sent them copies of the consultation of the strategy and of the questions and things from there, so people could respond from there. We also made it available that if people wanted to come and collect a hard copy of the strategy and the questions, that they could do so from the centre as well. So it was more difficult, but we did try.
And the other two questions, demographics and follow-up.
Demographics I don't have to hand, but yes, we did ask those, so I can provide those for you. That's not a problem. We didn't ask people to provide their personal details though, so there wouldn't be any specific contact back to specific people, but our plan is to be able to ask people when they're coming into the centre, or there'll be some feedback that they'll be able to complete if they've used a form online. But that's our plan over the next few months, to sort of technologically, how can we get that to work, and what questions can we ask, and how do we collect that information from them.
Do you have a marketing budget for this kind of thing?
No, I don't think so. I think I'm not aware that we have one. Do we, Anthony?
I don't think we have a specific one, but you know, we do have a budget to do some publicity work. So I don't think it'd be a problem budget-wise to do this work. It's not going to be a barrier for us.
Yeah, I think just public consultation and local government is a problem in general. Unless it's a really juicy or contentious issue, people don't seem to get involved. So finding new avenues to reach the public so that we can get more voices is quite important. And social media advertising, etc. You know, that's the way forward, as we're talking about digital strategy here. Potentially there's somewhere we need to be looking at. Final question is, in terms of how long do we see ourselves working in this hybrid basis, in terms of trying to reduce the number of front desk staff so that people are doing more on the phone and more online? You know, in doctors' surgeries and everywhere, they're trying to reduce face-to-face, aren't they? Do we see there being a point in the future where there just won't be a front desk and everything's done online or on the phone?
I think that will never happen, because I think that the nature of some of our residents is that they will always need some form of advice or support, or indeed you know, full support in terms of access to services. And there are some services we can't put online. There's a lot we can, but there are some services which don't fit, you know, in terms of providing support and advice to particularly our, you know, our vulnerable members of society. It's not, you know, it's not appropriate. So there will always be a front desk, there will always be a telephone service. Yes, the number of customers will go down, and you know, that process will carry on as technology moves forward, but that's an absolute guarantee, and that's part of the strategy. There will always be a member of staff at the end of the phone, or in our contact centre, or indeed, you know, some sort of visiting service for particular services that will be able to reach out to people.
That's good to know. So you're not going to have any robots stood on the front desk doing the.
Well, I won't make any comments about some of our existing staff, but no, but definitely human beings.
Councillor Harker.
Thank you. I'm pleased to hear that answer to the question and make the point, and it's not so much about the local authority, but looking back over COVID, where effectively we've had many months of people working in isolation, living in isolation, which is what, if we're not careful, a digital age will bring in terms of interactions. People's mental health, for some people, has suffered severely because they've had so little contact over the last year. And we sort of made the point in this discussion, and it's not just affecting us, but if we're not careful, we are drifting into a society where there is no need to have any human interactions. You can do everything online. For lots of people, that's absolutely fine. It's what they want to do. But there are some people for whom that it brings severe mental health problems. And I think we do need to be very conscious of that, that collectively as a society, that's one of the downsides of going absolutely digital and nothing else. And I think Anthony's right that we shouldn't ever think that we can do all we do entirely by those means, because there are other huge disbenefits that we need to be very mindful of. And it's not something we can solve as a council, but we are part and parcel of a society that's moving towards more digital, and there are wider consequences that we must think about. Get off my hobby horse. Thank you.
Completely agree. Any further questions on that section? No? Okay. Thank you again, Anthony and Claire, for your report and all the hard work you've been doing. We will now move on to number 5, which is performance indicators, quarter 2, 2021-2022. No one specifically is presenting this, but do any of the ADs want to say anything about their sections before we move on to questions?
I'm quite happy to do a summary if you would like, Councillor Renton.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks, Brett.
Yeah, just a summary of the report itself that members have obviously seen. As the chair said, this is the quarter 2 performance indicator report for 21-22, and the KPIs that are included in that report are as agreed by the monitoring and coordination group in June 2018, and then subsequently agreed by scrutiny chairs. Within our report, we have 22 KPIs, and they're aligned to the key priorities of the service area. Paragraph 10 summarises the KPIs that have targets for the first 6 months and shows where they are against those targets, and paragraph 11 summarises the remaining KPIs and where they are against either this time last year or previous years. At Appendix 1, there is the full scorecard of all 22 KPIs, which shows the current situation with regard to that target in year, and also previous year's data as well on there. Paragraphs 14 to 33, as referenced there by Councillor Renton, actually provide some narrative against the performance against those KPIs to date up to the end of quarter 2. But myself, Anthony and Mark will quite happily take questions further on those narratives within there. The report does cover 5 assistant directors areas, 2 which aren't represented today, so it may be that either myself, Anthony or Mark might not be able to answer those questions for those relevant ADs, in which case we'll have to get responses and feedback to the group. Happy to take any questions on the report.
Very good, thank you, Brett. I'll open the floor to questions. Councillor Harker.
Thank you. I'm just trying to find the annotations I made in the report. In paragraph 15, which is talking about the a churn of staff, it suggests that there's been a higher rate of staff leaving recently because there clearly weren't many job interviews taking place during a number of the lockdown periods. The paragraph also refers to exit interviews. Is that borne out by what people are saying in exit interviews, that they've sort of delayed career changes because of COVID? And secondly, on page 30, it talks about that we're collecting more arrears this year than last year. Is that as a percentage, or is that simply that there were more people in arrears because of COVID and there's a greater debt for us to collect this year, and hence we're collecting more than normal simply because the debt is greater? And finally, on page 31 in the culture section, it talks about community mobility data released by Google. I was just curious to know what that is.
I'll just say that, Councillor Harker, you have the floor, so you don't have to ask all three in one. You can.
No. I thought I only had two questions, then found the third, but I can repeat the question if it would be helpful.
I'm happy to come back on the first point, which was with regard to paragraph 16. Sorry, not paragraph 15.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have the full details of all the exit surveys to hand, but obviously the exit surveys do pick up reasons why staff have moved on, and what we've had in that period of time is 92 staff that have actually left, and of those 50 have got new employment, so over half of those have got new employment in that time. And what was evident is that in 2020, this time last year in the same period, that there wasn't those opportunities around, that people were able to move on to new roles, etc. And also there has been some additional opportunities arisen in Darlington as well. So 35 of those that have gone to alternative employment have gone to non-local authority employment, and 15 have gone to other local authorities within that time period. I would need to dig out the full details of exactly what's on the exit surveys for those and come back to you with those, but it was clear that certainly in comparison for the first quarter of this year to the first quarter of last year, that there weren't those opportunities, and that obviously staff were as well quite reluctant to move on in the career at that point in time, with all the uncertainty and the lockdown in that period of time. Last year, obviously, we were in lockdown for quite a lot of that period, the first 6 months of the year, whereas the first 6 months of the current year, we've actually been coming out of lockdown during that period. So the opportunities were different because we were moving out of the pandemic as it appeared at that point in time, whereas the previous year we were still very early in the pandemic in terms of our knowledge of how that would impact on employment and things in the future. So I hope that answers your question, but I would need to dig out a bit more on the exit surveys and come back to you.
Thanks.
I can answer the question about the arrears you raised, Councillor Harker. Yes, as paragraph 20 suggests, during 2021, the amount of council tax arrears went up by about £1 million, and that's because of a lot of our recovery activities were suspended during that period because of COVID. Now, those, of course, restarted this year, so hence, obviously, we'll be able to sort of recoup some of that money. So that's why the arrears figure has increased this year compared to last year. So
as a percentage, is it pretty much where it normally is?
It probably is. It's been difficult to do year-on-year comparisons with COVID, yes. But because of some of the reliefs that were available during COVID, etc. So, but yeah, generally percentage-wise, it's probably around where it normally should be pre-COVID. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay.
And the final question I had was community mobility data. I just wondered if someone could tell me what that was.
Chair,
24.
So I was going to say, Chair, I can't, and I'm not sure anybody on this call could, but what we'll certainly do is speak to Ian Thompson and get that back to the committee, if that's all right. Unless anybody, Mark, I was going to say Mark's on the call, I don't know whether he knows anything about it, but it might be one we have to come back to, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Elizabeth, I can't help you out on that one, I'm afraid.
Mysterious person wrote that in the report, didn't they?
Yeah, I don't think it's usual for Ian's services to come to this committee, which is maybe why he's been left off the list. But yeah, we'll pick that up for you. Apologies.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Curtis has put his hand down, so I'll ask a question. This is on environmental health, and I'm not sure anyone in the room would be able to answer this question, but it potentially needs some work, but also a bit of understanding. During the pandemic, obviously, we had a huge increase of people ordering food from takeaway places, and also a massive surge in new businesses offering food. So there was obviously an instruction from the Food Standards Agency not to visit premises. So firstly, I need to get an understanding of who needed to be inspected. For example, I knew a guy who set up a business that was making hot food plates of burgers and this, that, and the other. Would he have had to have an inspection? And there is obviously a huge backlog now of inspections needing to take place. So what are the negatives of that we may be seeing because of it? If you imagine, let's say, a takeaway place, if they're seeing a massive influx in orders, potentially there could be a drop in standards, health standards. So what are the negative effects of this? I don't know who could answer this. If not, maybe there might even be a piece of work that we need to look into this.
I'll try to answer it, Chair, if that's okay. Yeah, you're quite correct. The service was under pressure during COVID with lockdown, etc., because a lot of hot takeaways still remained open. There was a great deal more work focusing on compliance to COVID regulations than obviously in normal situations, but staff are still working hard everybody has to be inspected over a 12-month period. The Food Standards Agency have probably, I would say, relaxed some of the measures in regards to inspection that are required given the time period, because each area needs to be inspected at least once a year. But staff are continuing to do this. Now, just with regards to your example, yes, if that person is actually delivering them to the public, then he would have to be inspected. He would need to register with our environmental health team, and in due course, he would be inspected to ensure that he meets all the hygiene and health and safety regulations that are required for anybody who is dispensing hot or cold food to the general public. The inspections are now are very much in train. Yes, there is a backlog, but we're beginning to, I suppose, revise the way that we're working. We're looking to possibly bring in some agency staff to help to achieve that catch up. So there is a work programme in position, Chair, to ensure that we meet our statutory requirements of inspecting the food takeaways and restaurants and other businesses that fall under that particular definition.
Yeah. So you said that everyone has to be visited within a 12-month period, but was that scrapped during the main year of COVID, whichever year that was? I don't know. We've had so many years now.
Yeah, it was, Chair, in regards to well, first of all, staff going out there to be able to visit because they were taken onto other duties, which were more COVID related. Not every business has to be inspected every year. It's based on a risk basis. So therefore, if you're a sweetie shop, you're not inspected every year because the risk of contamination is quite low. But if you are someone who's selling, cold meats and cooked meats together, then you're seen as high risk. So therefore, you would be inspected on a yearly basis.
Okay, and do we have figures in terms of, you say here premises within the borough have shown consistently high level of compliance year on year, but in terms of since we've started doing the more regular inspections, have we seen a difference in the results? Have we seen businesses that have gone a year without inspection and suddenly we've found problems, an increase in that, or?
I wouldn't like to comment on that anecdotally, Chair. That's more of like a qualitative type of view rather than a quantitative type of view of the inspections. But I can find that out from the environmental health team as regards to their views on non-compliance, for example, or in certain areas, and I'm quite happy to furnish you with that information.
Okay, I know this committee, I think 2 years ago, had a presentation from the environmental health team. I think it might be a good time if they're doing a piece of work on that. They've got a work program, everything. Might be a good time for us to have a Teams talk with them to ask any further questions.
Okay, Chair. I'm sure Shirley and I can organise that.
Brilliant. Okay. Any further questions on those performance indicators? No. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone who contributed there. Next, we have the what everyone's been waiting for. Point 6, the MTFP 2022-2023, and we have Elizabeth Davidson and Brett.
Thanks very much, Chair. Yeah, just a brief introduction, really. I think most of you were able to attend the MTFP briefing that we did last year, Brett and myself. And that gave you the overview, really. And today's about answering any particular questions you've got in general or with specific reference to this committee and the services this committee looks after. Just so there's no confusion, for this committee to move, it's for this committee to sort of forward any views or any comments it has on the MTFP to ourselves, I suppose, to the Economy and Resources Committee on the 20th of January. All scrutiny committees will be doing that, where Economy and Resources will then pull forward a joint view to forward to Cabinet for their consideration. Before we go into questions, I thought it would be, I'm not sure if everybody has listened to this in the last couple of days. There's been a few scrutiny committees, but just wanted to give everybody a quick update on the finance settlement, which we received on the 16th of December, so subsequent to the draft that you're looking at. The council tax and preset levels were the same, so 2% and 1% respectively. And it's assumed that they are increased to those levels because that's been included in the core spending power that the government figure has put out. The £1.5 billion worth of funding announced in the autumn statement has been split in two ways. 822 million for a services grant. Now that's not ring fenced, but then there's also 636 million for social care specifically. Darlington's allocation is 1.579 million. And 1.162 million respectively there. So it's very slightly higher than the 2.7 million that you see in your draft MTFP. We've been told the services grant is one-off funding and a one-off payment while they review the financing system for local government. So it wouldn't be included in any baseline protections moving forward if our funding was to drop. So that's the sort of difference really on having them both as one. The good news is, however, and we weren't expecting this, that the new homes bonus has been extended for another year. We had a really buoyant house building year last year, and so that will net us about 1.4 million above our anticipated in the MTFP. There are a couple of reductions, however. The top-up grant isn't as high as we thought it would be, but overall, on the draft you've got, we should net an additional £1.073 million in 22-23 from the settlement, which is good news. So whilst the short-term nature of this services grant that I've just explained is disappointing, it's sort of understandable because they need to review the whole system of distribution across the country. Overall, good news for 22-23, but it doesn't fundamentally change the NTFP position over the 4 years. We've got an affordable 4-year plan, but we do have a growing gap year on year. And Chair, it's over to yourself and the committee for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. Any comments or questions from the floor? Council body?
Hello, Elizabeth. Happy New Year. Specifically in relation to the new homes grant, that am I right in thinking that doesn't just apply to new builds, but also applies to properties brought back into use, such as flats above shops and things?
That's correct.
And are we doing any work on that, specifically in the town centre?
Yes, I think it's an ongoing work. It always has been, to bring any void properties we can back into use. So they would be included in the figures. The only thing I need to put on there is the fact that this has been extended for 1 year. So this will be for properties that have already been brought back into use or new. It's unlikely to happen for future years. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Harker.
Thank you, Chair. I'll do the questions one by one this time. So Elizabeth, going back to the detail you gave about the final settlement that we had, the additional money that we got, you said some of it had been specifically said it wasn't recurring, it's 1 year only, so that was the services part of it. The bit that was budgeted for social care, does that then mean that part of it is recurring? Because I'm not sure you said as much.
Well, I mean, there's no guarantees because the whole finance system will be looked at and reviewed. But what they've said is that grant, that the social care element, it will be included in our baseline. So therefore, if next year the finance settlement was poor, they would have it in the baseline and therefore they would have some sort of transition phasing. So just say our grant did drop significantly, what they would do is not make any local authority take that hit in 1 year and they would transition it. So that bit of the grant would be included in our baseline. The other bit of the grant wouldn't. So if we did have a drop, we wouldn't be transitioned up to that other element.
Right.
So I don't know if that's clear, if I'm explaining myself
right. So one will definitely lose next year, and the other, if we do lose it, it will be tapered over a period of time.
That's correct.
Yeah, I'm with you. In paragraph 22, it talks about the efficiencies and savings, and it's referenced in a number of the tables in terms of anticipated savings. Do we have details as to what they are and where they will sit? Because 4-odd million is quite a significant amount of money to be saving.
Yes, they're all in. I mean, I can pass over to Brett on this one, but they're all highlighted in Appendix 2. All the savings are there, yeah. And they add up to the £4.264 million.
Right.
Do you want us to go through those?
No, I'll assuming there is someone else who's going to ask questions. I'll have a look at that and come back. Right. So moving on. And in terms of that additional money that's coming out of the final details of the spending review, what's the intent, which I guess is both a question for officers and any cabinet members present, is the idea that it will simply be that additional million, is that going to be put into balances or will it be used for some other purpose?
At this moment, Town Councillor Harker, there's been no conversations yet with Cabinet, and I think it would depend on the outcome of consultation as well. So there may be things comes out of consultation, but also we need our Q3 revenue budget management before the final report comes to see how that goes. Obviously, from a prudent perspective and accountancy perspective, I would say we've got a growing gap, so it would help our gap in the future years, but that wouldn't take any account of consultation or any priorities. Those conversations haven't happened yet.
I don't know, Chair, is Scott, he didn't join, did he? Probably more in his purview in terms of...
Can't see him in the meeting, no.
Yeah.
I mean, this is more of an observation, but in terms of the council tax income, paragraph 42 notes that by 2025-6, council tax will reflect 61% of our budget. And just to make the observation, council tax is a regressive tax, and the greater proportion of our revenue budget that it becomes, the inequities of that as a tax just increases, both in terms of our residents who are less well off than many parts of the country, and also from a council's perspective in terms of our ability to raise revenue. it is an issue that needs addressing. I appreciate it's a national issue, but I think it does need saying that, you know, and I'm sure that 61% will continue to rise if something doesn't change in terms of how local government is funding, and it is grossly unfair, both to residents and also the services that we are ultimately able to provide to those residents. It's probably more a point for politicians and officers.
I can respond quickly on that one if you want to, if that's all right, Chair. We have lobbied as ANEC, the 12 North East authorities on that point, as have a number of local authorities. So that certainly has been lodged with government about the inequality of percentage raises in council tax and the effect that therefore has. So it has been lobbied, and I know that Councillor Durham and the leader have also been involved in those conversations as well. The government did this year, and Brett will help me out here because I'm struggling, but they have given us a little top up of money, and I can't remember what exactly it was called, which took into account the fact that our percentage raise wouldn't increase or increase our resources as much as others. Brett, you can't remember what it was called, can you? It's about 147,000 last year.
That's not the lower services tier grant, is it?
Yes, that's it. Thank you. The lower services tier grant. So they recognised that we wouldn't be able to increase as much as others, but I think that was to do with the social care precept. So at least there is some sort of recognition there that there is an issue by government.
Indeed, and I'm still deeply sceptical that much will be done about it. And I suppose, again, and it's more an observation for politicians present, and you know, not picking on you, Alan, but you are the only cabinet member in the meeting. I mean, clearly the budget is a balanced budget, but over the 4 years, it's using our usable reserves quite substantially. In particular, in the last 2 years, it's around £18 million of balances being used to sustain the budget. Clearly, it's okay for this coming year because it only uses, I think it was £500,000 the year after, probably I think it was 4. But that budget going forward, it is unsustainable as it stands, because clearly in the 5th year we have no further balances to call upon. I'm acutely conscious, and I'm sure cabinet members are, that if we have to make changes to the local authority in terms of its spend to basically reduce by £9 million, that isn't something that you can do quickly. And I'm curious as to whether cabinet is doing anything at the moment in terms of horizon thinking about how we would address that, because you know the argument's well rehearsed. We know we are at the point where we can do very little above statutory services, and if we have to take a hit of £9 million to redress the use of balances, that will be quite a substantial job to do, and it isn't something that we will be able to do in a hurry. And I'm just curious as to whether cabinet is having any thoughts at this point in time about how it might address that issue.
When you come back in, Elizabeth, I think it's a fair comment, Steve. I think that the issues to do with the longer term are always on the agenda for discussion with Elizabeth and the team, and it's something we have to keep working at, and you know, and I think as Elizabeth said, we have made appeals to government. It isn't a fair basis of funding, and it has to change, and we'll see what changes come out as after this 1 year settlement. But it is an issue that's also under review, Steve. I can guarantee you that. I'm not an expert on it, as everybody knows here. I'm not steeped in these accountancy figures, but it is recognised. That's all I'll say.
I think, Chair, the overall principle is the strategy of economic growth. So obviously the upward spiral of economic growth, and the more businesses we attract, the more business rates we will achieve, and hopefully the more housing we build, if we've got good quality jobs for people to be in these companies. So it's all on economic growth. Now, we have been doing really well over the past few years. Obviously, we've got the Treasury and the government campus coming as well, which is obviously not reflected in any of our NDR figures yet, because it'll probably be after the 5 years' time. But that's the overall strategy. Thank you.
I mean, if I can come back on that, I think, yes, there are many things that are being done to improve our revenue budget. I think I'm not convinced that we can do sufficient to bridge a gap of £9 million, which is where it's sitting at the end of the thing. I appreciate it's 4 years away, things may change, but that is quite a substantial gap. And again, it's a comment I'd make, which is more for politicians. I am sceptical about the extent to which government might resolve the problem, because we've been having this discussion since 2010, since the cuts started, and in all that time it has largely fallen on deaf ears in terms of the impact it has had. And it's not just about the affordability of us to provide services, it's the impact it's having in terms of the wider society. And we're seeing things like rising differences in expected age at death, disparities increasing again, and that was something that had been largely not resolved, but big improvements had been made. And it's just one example of how we are drifting back into societies where some people are fine and many people are not. And I suppose what I'm saying is I'm not convinced that government really understands that as an issue, because it's been patent to see for over a decade and nothing has been done. And hence the question to Cabinet, because I suppose what I'm saying is I'm not convinced that government's going to come in on a white horse and save the situation. That we may need to do things ourselves to fix it, and it may be very difficult to do. And we can't just sort of sit here twiddling our thumbs hoping government will save the day.
Unfortunately, I have to agree with you on most of what you just said, certainly in terms of the past and present, but I do hope our knight in shining armour does come along from the government one day, because otherwise we may be in a bit of a mess. So I have to say, do we have any specific comments that we want to pass on with the report? And completely agree with the point Councillor Harker made in terms of increasing and continuing our lobbying of government to ensure fair funding. Councillor Harker, was anything else you wanted to put in there specifically as a sentence / paragraph comment?
I mean, I suppose, I mean, the lobbying we need to do, and I'm sure it is being done, to what extent that has an impact, it's, you know, we don't know. I think because of the scale of the problem, I do feel that the authority, and I'm not sure what I'm asking really here, but I do think that there needs to be some evidence of work being done by Cabinet in terms of what if scenarios. You know, because if government isn't forthcoming, or it takes too long before we have to make, you know, a huge round of further cuts, we do need to start thinking about what we might do and how we might manage that. So I suppose the ask back to Cabinet is something concrete in terms of what they are doing about thinking about those issues and how we address it. Even if we end up not having to do it, it's better to plan for it and have some sense of how we may manage it if we really need to do it. So I'll look to you, Chair, to think of some suitable phrasing for that.
I hope Shirley,
because that's what you get paid to do.
Councillor McEwen.
Well, I just support this, and I think it's important to say this isn't making a political point. It's more a quasi right thing, prudent thing to do. You know, if the suggestion is that there is a potential abyss heading our way, those that fail to plan to fail. So I do think, and I do like my sayings, don't I, Councillor Harker?
You do.
So I think there needs to be some mention that we need to have our mind or our eye on this and start some form of scenario planning.
Agreed. I'll work with Shirley to come up with the wording for that, and I will run it past you, Councillor Harker, just to make sure you're okay with that before we put that forward. And I will add myself. I don't think council tax rises are popular with anyone, but I think in a lot of people have concerns over what they're paying and how much it's increased, and with having had reduced services in a number of areas over COVID, I think this year more than any, we need to be really hot on our communication with the public in terms of why we're raising the council tax, where that money is being spent, where the increases are going, so that we avoid that negative impact it can have in terms of people's understanding of why they're having a council tax rise. So that would be my comment. Do we have any council body?
Could I just say, doing some back of the envelope figures based on the conversation I had with Elizabeth at the beginning, looking at I'm sure I've read somewhere that there are over 250 vacant properties in the across the authority area, which could be brought back into residential use. So potentially we're looking at maybe getting on for nearly £1 million there in central government grants, but only available for this year. And so if we're going to receive that money, we've really got to get on with bringing properties, especially flats above shops, back into residential use in the next 12 months.
Elizabeth?
Sorry, Councillor Boddy, I hope I haven't misinformed you. It's relating to the properties that have already come back into use last year. New homes bonus is based on. It's not based on the future year. It's based on the year gone. Just needs to make that clear.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Sorry about that.
But I agree that work has to be done to bring those properties back into service. Councillor Harker, did you have something to you about?
It was just also to add to what you were saying about the council tax. You know, what's happened over the last 10 years is that residents have paid more and they're getting less because government's cut the funding. I think also what we need to be particularly conscious of this coming year is, for many people, they're seeing lots of other things rise. So, you know, changes to national insurance rates, fuel bills are rising astronomically. People on universal credit have lost money. So there's a huge number of people in our town and borough that are going to be severely financially struggling next year. And any increase of any service that they get in terms of cost of it is going to be really difficult for them, and people are going to be deeply, deeply sceptical about continued rises when they're not getting anything for it. Basically, they're getting less and they're paying more, and that makes no sense to anybody, even if you can afford it.
Yep. Okay, thank you for the comment. Any further comments or questions before we move on? And I'll work with Shirley to streamline those. Councillor Cruddas.
Yeah, thank you. It's a bit of a circular thing, this. I mean, if the government is going to provide funds to alleviate our situation in councils, it's going to get them from us anyway. You know, the money comes from the people that pay taxes, and whether you pay it a council tax or whether you pay it as increased taxes elsewhere, you know, the better off in our society, which probably includes everybody on this call, will pay a little bit more. And there are support systems in for the people that can't afford it. So generally the system's set up, regardless of what government's in place, to support those that are less able to deal with these things, and to take the money from the people that can more afford it. So yes, I understand that from the council's point of view, the funds that we need to distribute to run our services are lacking, and it would be nice if it wasn't. But we all have to recognise that the money's got to come from somewhere, and we'll be the ones that's paying it. Thank you.
I'll have to counter you slightly on that, Councillor, because it is the struggling middle who get no support from anyone, who are going to be hit hardest by all of these rises.
That's me.
And the other thing I would say is that, as I said at the beginning, council tax is a regressive tax. It hits people who are less well off more so than it does wealthier people. You know, income tax, as your income rises, the tax you pay rises. And that's far less the case with council tax. And because council tax is such a bigger proportion of our revenue budget, it means those who are less well off are being penalised more than they were, say, 10, 15 years ago. And you know, if that's what government wants to do in terms of reducing funding to local authorities, we do need to look at how council tax is raised, because those who are better off are not seeing proportionately the amount they're paying increase as much as people who are less well off in terms of disposable income. And that's what's unfair about it. Quite clearly, yeah, wherever the money comes from, ultimately we're paying for it, but it's whether the means of raising that funding is fair. And I would argue that because of how council tax is increasing as a proportion of our revenue budget, that fairness is, you know, has long disappeared.
Okay. If there are no further comments or questions, I'll work with Shirley to put those together to then have them come back to this committee in a month's time. So if there's nothing else on that point, we will move on to oh, and thank you, Elizabeth, and your team for putting that report together, or the whole MTFP. We'll move on to point number 7, which is the work programme. So I'll pass over to Shirley to go through a few points on this.
Thanks, Chair. There's nothing, I haven't really got anything else to add to the report that's there, just as a couple of updates. There is a briefing schedule for members of the Scrutiny Committee on the outcomes of the employee survey, which is going to be held next week. That's on the 10th. And Mark is going to do an update on the markets as well on the 27th of January. Both of those are via Teams briefings. However, if there is any issues that specifically arising from those briefings, we can look at bringing those back into Scrutiny Committee as a more formal report. And that's all I've got to add, Chair.
Okay, thank you. We've also got the joint piece of work with the education, children and young people, apologies, on the learning and skills money being spent by the TVCA. A member of staff from the TVCA has agreed to give us a presentation on that, and I realised I'd replied to an email and not actually included the person I needed to send it to. So, but we're looking at early February, end of January for that presentation. So a date will be forthcoming. And I think it sounded like someone was about to say something. Do we have any other comments or Anthony?
Yes, thanks, Chair. It's just to reiterate what I said in my presentation about the customer service and digital strategy, whether you wanted an update a bit later in the year to be put on the work plan.
Yes, yeah, that would be good. Thank you. We'll put it on without a date, and then you can inform us as to when it's ready. That's okay.
Yeah.
Do we have any other additions, subtractions that anyone would like to discuss?
Chair, did we start a discussion at some point last year about performance indicators in terms of what performance indicators are reported to the committee?
We did, and if I remember correctly, Shirley did send out the full list, didn't you, for us to review? And I think you didn't have any comments back.
Yeah, Chair, if you just want me to, yeah, I did circulate them all. There was quite a lot to choose from. I think it was quite a substantial list. So it was really to work out the best way forward, really, in shortening that list so it's easier for members to choose the ones that they want to. I can happily recirculate the list, the relevant ones, if you want to, have another look at those and come back to me.
Well, why don't, if you want to circulate that list, and then let's get a date in the diaries for us to sit down on Teams, and then that will make people look at the list and consider it. Not that people didn't previously, but then we open a discussion, and then we know that if we have nothing to change, then at least that work's been done.
Yeah, I can do that, Chair.
Apologies, I possibly misunderstood what we were doing, because I thought we were coming back together, possibly informally, to have a discussion about it. But I was just conscious that it's sort of well, I wasn't clear what happened. I certainly was aware Shirley had sent that out, but yeah.
I think it must have been a misunderstanding because no one had come back with any comments, so we thought there was no work to be done. But no, it'd be a good idea to just do that to make sure, definitely, so it doesn't come up again. Do we have any further comments, questions on the work programme? No. Okay, any supplementary items? And I have none, and unless anyone puts any hands up, I don't think there will be any. No, great. So if there's no further questions or comments, thank you all for attending this morning. Thank you everyone for the work that you do putting together reports for this committee. Have a good day. See you soon.